Hi and welcome to another story, and today we have part 3 of The Worst Witch Saves the Day by Jill Murphy, continuing from chapter 12. Mildred jumped onto Maud's broom and was up among the turrets within seconds. She landed on a flat area with an old chimney stack in the middle and dismounted so that she could take a calm look around. To her delight, she saw Tabby at once. He was 2 rooftops away, curled up in a miserable hunch underneath a window. "Tabby!" called Mildred. "Don't move, I'm coming over." Tabby didn't respond at all. He was making his low, growly whining noise, looking across at Mildred with eyes like saucers. Suddenly Mildred heard a voice coming from the window, an unmistakable, high-pitched, squeaky voice. "Who is out there?" called the voice. "Come along now, I know someone's there." Mildred ducked behind the chimney stack as Miss Granite leaned out of the window and spotted Tabby cowering just below the windowsill. She reached out, bundled him up the wall into her arms and disappeared back inside the room. Mildred flew down to the courtyard. "Well?" called Maud, as her friend came in to land. "Any luck?" "Sort of," said Mildred glumly. "Miss Granite's room is up there, and Tabs was outside her window, so she's taken him into her room. At least he'll be safe inside, and he didn't look as though he'd broken anything. He did look a bit balmy, though. If anything else happens to him, I don't think he'll ever get back to normal." "Are you going to ask Miss Granite if you can collect him?" asked Enid. "Tricky," said Mildred. "We're not supposed to go up that high. On the other hand, Miss Granite doesn't seem to mind what we do." "Doesn't she?" said a squeaky voice, as Miss Granite materialised, HB style, behind them. "I think you'll find that I do mind what's going on behind my back. Now then, Mildred Hubble, isn't it? I'd like to know what your cat was doing 50 metres up in an area that's out of bounds to you girls." I mumbled Mildred wretchedly. I took a wrong turning and got a bit lost, and Tabby sort of fell off. He's still feeling a bit delicate after the, incident last night with the hair-growing spell." "Oh yes, that!" squeaked Miss Granite. She took a step closer to Mildred, and for some reason, Mildred felt a sudden chill. Perhaps it was the tinted glasses, which had a sort of blank look and seemed a little sinister. "I hope you weren't snooping, Mildred Hubble. I hope you weren't spying on me." Oh, no, Miss Granite," said Mildred. "Not at all. It was just an accident that I was up there." "You seem to have rather a lot of accidents, Mildred Hubble," said Miss Granite. "In fact, as far as I have seen, you've had some sort of accident every 5 minutes since term began. And from what I have heard, it's been exactly the same for the entire 2 years you've been here. Anyway, just keep away from my room," she continued, "or you'll be sorry, understand?" "Yes, Miss Granite," mumbled Mildred, blushing. "But could I go and collect Tabby first?" "What did I just say, girl?" exploded Miss Granite, sounding like an irate hamster. "Your ridiculous cat is perfectly safe where he is. I'll bring him to you when I see fit. Until then, the subject is closed. Now then, girls." She turned to the rest of the class, who had gradually reassembled in the yard. "It's time for your lunch, followed by an afternoon of chanting with Miss Bat. Good morning." She disappeared just as the lunch bell clanged out across the yard. "Wow," said Enid. "What a change." "That was really weird," said Mildred. "She still got that funny voice, but she sounded really terrifying, almost like HB. What did you think, Maud?" "Perhaps she wakes up in a bad temper," said Maud. "She did say she was going to have a rest, didn't she?" "Well," said Mildred, "at least Tabs is okay. She'll probably give him to me later. Come on, let's go and see what horrors await us at lunch. Someone said it was spinach with fried eggs on it today." "Please," laughed Maud. Chapter 13. Evening arrived and Miss Granite did not bring Tabby down from her room. Mildred tried to pluck up courage to ask if it would be possible to fetch him, but Miss Granite seemed very grumpy and unapproachable, and somehow Mildred could sense that she would go berserk if anyone suggested it. Everyone was sent to bed early that night. Miss Granite announced that she wanted them all asleep by 8:30 after their disgraceful behaviour the previous night. Miss Hardbroom materialised next to Miss Granite as she was in mid-rant at the girls, who were lined up nervously in the form-free bedroom corridor. "I'm pleased to see that you are taking a firm line with these girls, Miss Granite," said Miss Hardbroom approvingly. "They really do need to be kept in order at all times. Give them an inch and they'll take a mile, as we saw yesterday, especially with Mildred Hubble in the class." "I quite agree, Miss Hardbroom." Miss Granite nodded. "We've all decided to pull together, girls, haven't we? No more nonsense. From now on it's hard work and discipline all the way." A while later, when everyone was supposed to be safely in their beds, Mildred crept from her room and knocked at Maud's door. "Can I come in, Maud?" she whispered. "Just for a sec." "Do be careful, Mill," said Maud, opening the door just wide enough to let Mildred sneak inside. Miss Granite seems to have had a personality transplant. All that easygoing stuff, and now she's turned into Attila the Hun. There's something funny going on, Maud, said Mildred. I don't know what it is, but there's something creepy about her. Her voice is so odd. I mean, I've met people with high voices before, but hers doesn't sound real. And the way she isn't giving us any lessons is as if she doesn't know how to teach. Maybe she isn't a real teacher at all. Maybe she's an imposter. Well, there's nothing we can do about it, said Maud. We'd better just keep out of her way and hope for the best. I'm worried about Tab, said Mildred. Why hasn't she given him back to me? Maybe she's going to use his whiskers for some spell or other. I think I might sneak up and see if I can get him out. Don't, said Maud flatly. Just don't. I'm sure he'll be okay for one night. She's probably just forgotten. Promise me, Mill. Promise you won't do anything silly. Oh, all right, said Mildred. I promise. Night, Maud. Mildred climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to her chin. The bats were all out on their nightly hunt, and the room was silent and lonely without Tabby purring and kneading the covers on her chest. She couldn't bear to lie there knowing her beloved pet might be longing to hear her voice, so she decided to risk disaster. Mildred crept into the corridor and set off up the 3 spiral staircases which led to the maze of corridors where the teachers had their rooms. As she paused at the foot of the second staircase, she heard someone coming downstairs and ducked behind a display cabinet with a large vase of dried flowers on top of it. It was Miss Hardbroom, wearing outdoor clothes and carrying her broom, with Morgana, her beautiful cat, skittering behind her trying to keep up. Miss Hardbroom was off to visit her friend, Miss Pentangle, who was headmistress of Pentangle's Academy, a neighbouring witches' school several mountain tops away. She was pleased that the irritating Miss Granite had turned over a new leaf, and that the school was quiet and orderly for the night, just as it should be. She was also looking forward to an evening of interesting conversation, as well as a taxing game of chess, and possibly just one glass of sherry, as she was in such a good mood. Mildred flattened herself against the wall, and held her breath until she heard the heavy front door close several floors below, with a resounding thud. All the rooms had neat brass name card holders, with the teachers' names inscribed in Gothic lettering, so it only took Mildred a few moments of silent slinking along the top corridor and peering at the name cards before she found Miss Granite's room. Mildred pressed her ear against the door. It was completely silent from the other side. She called very softly, "Tabby! Tabs, it's me!" A loud meow sounded immediately from the other side of the door. Mildred turned the handle and went in. Tabby was on the far side of the room, in a cat basket on the table. Mildred was so pleased to see him that she was halfway across the room before she realised that the meow had come from immediately behind the door. She turned to look back, just as the door swung shut, and nearly jumped out of her skin when she saw Miss Cackle standing behind her. "Oh, Miss Cackle!" exclaimed Mildred. "It's you. I'm sorry. I've just come to collect Tabby. I thought perhaps Miss Granite had forgotten." "No, Mildred," said Miss Cackle, smiling kindly as she always did. "Miss Granite knew that you would come back and collect Tabby. That's why she decided to hold on to him for a little while longer." "I don't know what you mean, Miss Cackle," said Mildred. "Why would Miss Granite want to keep Tabby? He wouldn't be of any use to her. I don't understand." "Let me show you something, my dear," said Miss Cackle. She took Mildred's arm and led her to a door which opened into a linen cupboard full of towels and sheets. Then, without any warning, she shoved Mildred inside, slammed the door and locked her in. Chapter 14. "Miss Cackle!" yelled Mildred. "Please let me out. I really don't like the dark." "It's all right, Mildred," said Miss Cackle soothingly. "It won't be for long. You didn't guess, did you? Let me give a little clue." There was a loud cackle of laughter, and the voice suddenly changed into Miss Granite's odd squeak. "Don't you remember what happened last time we met in the middle of the wood, Mildred Hubble, when you turned us all into snails?" "Yes, Mildred. Miss Granite is none other than Agatha Cackle, your precious Miss Cackle's twin sister, in a curly wig and hiding behind purple dark glasses. I can't believe that none of you twigged." Her voice changed back to normal, sounding very like Miss Cackle. "I must say it's wonderful not to have to put on that awful voice anymore. Anyway, my dear, this time the plans are dead cert, and tonight's the night. The only person I was worried about was you, with your knack of always turning up at the wrong time. So with you in the cupboard, my plan can't fail. All I have to do is wait till everyone's asleep in their beds. Then at 2 o'clock precisely, the other members of my coven arrive at the entrance in the backyard, and hey presto, abracadabra. I just saunter down and let them all in, and quick as a flash, the school is mine. Miss Agatha Cackle's Academy of Real Witchcraft. No more of this namby-pamby, play it by the rules, goody two-shoes stuff. Now then, what can we turn them all into? It was going to be frogs last time, but you gave me an idea when you turned us into snails. They don't move so fast, much easier to catch. There you are, Mildred. Just occasionally you do have an excellent idea. I can't tell you what fun it's been planning all this right under my dear sister's nose. And that awful Harbroom person. They both think they're so clever, but they didn't suspect anything. Well, my dear, just make yourself comfy in there. It's going to be a long night." She let out a horrible cackling laugh, and Mildred could hear her move away from the door. Mildred took some deep breaths and tried very hard to calm down. She really was afraid of the dark, a great embarrassment for a trainee witch, and this was one of her worst nightmares, being trapped somewhere in the pitch dark with an enemy outside the door. Half an hour passed by, during which time Mildred could hear Agatha muttering to herself and moving about. She racked her brains as she tried desperately to think of a way out. The shelves in the cupboard were set back a little away from the door, and as she perched on the edge of some towels, Mildred saw that there was a crack beneath the door, where she could see a strip of light from the lantern, and Agatha's shadow moving around the room. Mildred realised, with horror, that she must think fast, as she would probably be the first snail. It suddenly dawned on her that if she could change herself into something small, she could sneak out under the door and seek help. Mildred was becoming something of an expert on the subject of transformation. In her first term, she had changed Ethel into a pig by mistake. Next, Ethel had turned Mildred into a frog, and later on, Mildred's friend Enid had changed her own cat into a monkey. Mildred's holiday project had been insect spells, and she knew how to change herself into either an ant or a caterpillar. To tell you the truth, she wasn't very keen on the idea of turning into either, but in the end she decided that an ant was the best idea. A caterpillar had all those legs to coordinate, plus it was slower and more noticeable. Also, if it was just at the stage where it was going to turn into a chrysalis, and knowing Mildred's luck it would be, the whole thing could get extremely complicated. She didn't fancy the idea of being wrapped up immobile for several weeks and then turning into a butterfly, and by the time she'd have forgotten who she was and what she was supposed to be doing. An ant seemed the better choice. Mildred considered the witch's code. Spells are never to be used for trivial or selfish reasons. This was neither. The school and everyone in it was in immediate danger. She had never actually turned herself into anything before, although she and Maud had disappeared once they were trying to make a laughter potion. That had been strange enough, being able to see right through yourself to the chair you were sitting on, but actually turning into something hundreds of times smaller than yourself was quite an unnerving thought. According to the witch's code, if you transformed yourself into an animal, you could still change yourself back into a human again. However, this was not the case if someone else changed you. In that case, you were trapped until the other person removed the spell. Mildred could see that there was really no choice. It was either a snail, forever, or a temporary ant. She chose the ant. Mildred braced herself and muttered the words of the spell, wrapping her arms around herself and flexing her fingers into little zaps of energy. It worked. First of all, she had a peculiar tingling feeling all over, with a sensation of being pulled inwards very fast from all parts of her body, even her hair. Then, very suddenly, she was an ant, a whole centimetre lower than the base of the door. The transformation was not exactly pleasant, although it didn't hurt and was so fast that she barely had time to panic. Mildred found that being an ant was very different to the way she had felt when Ethel had turned her into a frog. On that occasion, she had still felt very much like herself, despite being hunched into a frog position and being able to jump like an Olympic athlete. But being an ant, she found herself fizzing with manic energy and the compulsion to start zooming about in a sort of frenzy. In fact, it was quite difficult to remember what she was supposed to be doing, as she set off like a rocket into the room. She narrowly avoided being trodden on by Agatha and scuttled under the bedroom door and out into the corridor. The best thing to have done would have been for Mildred to change herself back once she was safely out of Miss Granite's bedroom, but she found it difficult to focus her ant brain on the intricacies of the reversal spell, especially as she had stumbled across a large cake crumb just outside the door and immediately felt an overwhelming desire to start dragging it back underneath the door towards the airing cupboard. "What on earth am I doing?" thought Mildred wildly, pushing the crumb away. "I must get back to Maud and find help." She beetled to the top of the stairs as fast as she could, desperately trying to stay focused on getting down the huge stone steps of the spiral staircases and back to the form-free corridor. Her progress was unfortunately hindered by a trail of cake crumbs, some of them with microscopic smears of jam, and each time she came across one, Mildred experienced the same all-consuming need to start either eating the crumb, especially those with jam on, or tidying the crumbs back towards Miss Granite's room. "Must get to Maud," said the ant Mildred, clambering resolutely over a boulder-sized morsel. "Must get to Maud, must get to Maud." It seemed to be taking forever. What with her tiny size and the delicious array of crumbs, each step on all 3 spiral staircases was as high as a mountain to an ant, even though it was quite fun to find that she could run down the upright part with complete ease. It was just taking such a long time. Chapter 15. Mildred finally arrived at Maud's door and skimmed underneath with a sigh of relief. At least there were no crumbs of any sort to distract her in Form 3's bedroom corridor, as the pupils were never allowed any sweets or cakes in addition to their free daily meals. If Mildred hadn't been so frantic in her mission to alert Maud, she would have been quite annoyed about the amount of cake crumbs she had encountered in the teachers' wing of the school. Now she realised that she faced a big problem. How on earth was she going to wake Maud up? Maud was a very heavy sleeper and was actually snoring, which meant she was deeply unconscious. She had a wonderfully calm, straightforward nature and tended to fall asleep the moment her head hit the pillow, unlike Mildred, who was always worried about something she had or hadn't done. By a useful stroke of luck, there was an almost full moon lighting the room well enough for Mildred to see where everything was. So she zoomed up the bed leg and onto Maud's pillow. The snoring was actually creating a hurricane-force wind as Mildred flicked her antennae against Maud's chin. Maud obviously felt the antennae in her sleep, because she raised her hand to brush the ant Mildred away. Fortunately, Mildred had proper ant-like reactions and zipped to one side before Maud's hand touched her chin. This is hopeless, thought Mildred. Even if I do wake her up and she sees me, she'll just think I'm an ant. She rested on her middle legs and absent-mindedly combed her antennae with her front ones while she tried to work out how she could let Maud know that she was Mildred and not an ant. The same situation had occurred when Mildred had been turned into a frog by Ethel, but Tabby had recognised the frog Mildred and cuddled up to her so that Maud had begun to wonder about things, especially as Mildred had gone missing. This time, Maud had no idea that Mildred was anywhere except in her own comfy bed next door. Mildred ran down the bedspread onto the floor and decided to skim up the leg of the small homework table under the window. By the light of the moon, Mildred could see that Maud had been in the middle of writing a letter. The pupils all had to write home once a week, telling their families what a happy and studious time they were having at Miss Cackle's. Miss Hardbroom always read through the letters before she took them to the post, so it was difficult to write anything other than, "I am very happy." "The food is wonderful, and I am doing lots of homework." Maud hadn't got much further than, "Dear all, I am so glad to be back with my friends." The rest of the page glowed blue-white in the moonlight, next to the bottle of black ink, which was uncovered as Maud had forgotten to put the top back on. "It really is more like a prison than a school," reflected Mildred glumly. "Perhaps I ought to just stay as an ant and live upstairs eating all the crumbs from the teacher's cakes for the rest of my life." Chapter 16. Back in Miss Granite's room, Agatha still had quite a lot of work to do before 2 o'clock. She had put Tabby's cat basket onto a chair and assembled a neat pile of shoe boxes and jam jars on the table. The boxes were all labelled Form 1, Form 2 and so on, and the jam jars were individually marked with the teachers' names in indelible black ink. Agatha sat at the table, busily cutting out circles of paper with air holes punched in them to go on the jars. She had already jabbed holes in the lids of the boxes and had a big bag of leaves and grass on the floor, ready to go into everything, so that the snails would be comfortable while Agatha and her coven decided what to do with them. The military precision of the operation was chilling to watch. By 12:30 everything was ready, and Agatha settled down with a large mug of tea and a packet of biscuits before the expected invasion at 2 o'clock sharp. Down in Maud's room, Mildred had devised a plan of action, which could only have been dreamed up by an ant. She had discovered that her antennae were neatly hinged so that they could be raised up and down and rotated. If she zipped up the side of the ink bottle and dipped both antennae into the ink, and then zoomed down onto the large piece of paper, she could drop dots of ink to form letters, thereby writing a message for Maud. This involved countless trips up and down the ink bottle in order to write anything that was big enough to read. In human form, this would have been impossible, but an ant has limitless focused energy and will carry on with any task until it drops. Mildred wished that she could somehow retain this extraordinary sense of purpose to use during lessons and exams once she was changed back into herself. After 20 manic minutes, she had written, "Help, not ant," and decided that this was enough to make Maud notice something odd. She set about cutting the paper with her sharp ant jaws into a size that she could drag up onto Maud's bed. After several minutes of feeling her way up the bedclothes, she reached the lower slopes of Maud's face and began swatting her with a piece of paper. Maud didn't wake up, but every now and then scrabbled at her face and shouted in her sleep. Mildred valiantly continued scuttling out of the way and then flapping the paper against Maud's face. But apart from the occasional shout, Maud remained fast asleep. Next door, Enid heard Maud's voice and wondered if she was all right. Another shout echoed down the corridor, and Enid could tell that it was her friend, half asleep and rambling. so she decided to go next door and wake her from whatever dream was upsetting her. "Maudie," whispered Enid, pushing open Maud's door and holding her candle aloft so that she could see around the room. "Wake up, Maud, you're having a bad—" She stopped as she was confronted with the bizarre sight of a piece of paper flicking backwards and forwards against Maud's face, apparently all by itself. "Maud, wake up," called Enid. "There's something really weird going on." Maud woke up, rubbing her eyes, and Enid snatched the piece of paper and examined it in the candlelight. "What's wrong, Enid?" cried Maud in alarm, propping herself up on her elbows. "It's the middle of the night." "You were shouting in your sleep," said Enid. "I thought you were having a nightmare, but when I came in, this piece of paper was sort of flapping around your face, like a moth or something, like it's got writing on it." "What's it say?" asked Maud, screwing up her eyes against the candlelight. "It says, 'Help, not ant.'" "What on earth does that mean? What's not ant?" "Perhaps it means an ant," said Maud. "What ant, though?" asked Enid. "Can you see an ant anywhere?" They held up the candle and immediately saw the Aunt Mildred, who had laboriously climbed off the bed back onto the table and carefully positioned herself in the middle of one of the sheets of white notepaper, where she knew she would be noticed. Maud and Enid brought the candle closer to the table so that they could see the ant and also the ink spatters where it had splashed some of the drops while writing the note. It was obvious that that was the ant in question. If you're not ant," said Enid, "then what are you?" The ant jumped up and down and twirled its feelers. Are you a person?" asked Maud. The ant jerked its antennae up and down like mini cranes and turned around twice in a complete circle. Maud and Enid looked at each other with growing unease. "You're not Mildred?" asked Enid. "You're not our friend Mildred Hubble?" At this, the ant began capering about, nodding with its antennae and zooming round and round in circles. Maud held out a finger, solemnly, and the ant bustled onto it. "Oh, Mildred," said Maud, "what on earth have you done now? Or did someone do this to you?" The ant moved its antennae from side to side, like a metronome, and shook its head. "Did you do it, then?" asked Maud, much nodding with the antennae. "Well then," said Enid, "why can't you change yourself back?" The ant ran to the end of Maud's finger and obviously wanted to get down. Maud put her gently back onto the paper and watched as Mildred zipped up the side of the ink bottle and began running up and down with antennae, drops of ink until she had written, "Forgot, spell." "There's 2 L's in spell," said Enid helpfully. "Don't be petty, Enid," said Maud. "It takes forever to write anything in ink drops." "We can see it spell. Clever clogs. Let's find insect spells in spell sessions 2, from last year. It's on the shelf by my bed." That would be more helpful than giving the poor ant a spelling lesson. I know Mildred was going to do insect spells for her summer holiday project. They found the ant spell, complete with reversal. "I don't know if this will work, Mill," said Maud, "but if I say the reversal spell out loud, perhaps you could try to concentrate on it and say it in an ant, in your head, and it might just work. I'll keep saying it over and over with little pauses in between, and hope you can remember it long enough. Okay? Right, here goes." Maud intoned the reversal spell, and then stopped while they both peered hopefully at the ant. Nothing happened. Enid read it out this time, and then they stopped and waited again. The ant did not move, and they were wondering what to do next, when the air began to vibrate and judder, as if a huge invisible lorry was passing through the room, and suddenly Mildred was standing on the table in front of them in a burst of swirling smoke and stars. She leapt from the table at once. "Come on, quickly you two," she said. "We can't delay." "What time is it?" Enid consulted her watch. "It's 1:30, she said. "But why?" "Oh no," said Mildred. "We've only got half an hour. They're all swarming in at 2:00 by the backyard gate. There's not a moment to lose." "Hang on, Mill," exclaimed Enid, grabbing her arm. "What on earth is this about? Who's swarming in at 2:00? You better explain before we all go charging off somewhere in our pyjamas." Mildred managed a very fast, rather garbled explanation about Miss Granite really being Agatha and the plot to take over the school and how she had locked Mildred in the cupboard, which explained the ant transformation so she could sneak under the door and raise the alarm. "Crumbs, Mill," said Maud. "We'd better wake Miss Cackle at once." "Blow out the candle, Enid," said Mildred. "We'll have to be really quiet. Agatha is planning this like a battle campaign, and she's absolutely ruthless." They snuffed out the candle, crept into the corridor and up to the teachers' rooms as fast as possible, which was quite difficult when they had to pause at every turn in case they bumped into Agatha. As they approached the top corridor, where the headmistress had her bedroom, they saw Miss Cackle sneaking along towards her own door. Enid was just about to call out when Mildred grabbed her and clapped her hand over her mouth. She had seen in the lantern light that this person was holding a jam jar with leaves in it. Mildred caught Enid and Maud's gaze and pressed a finger to her lips as the door opened and the shadowy figure slipped inside. "What's up, Mill?" whispered Maud, as soon as the door had closed. "We need Miss Cackle to help us." "It isn't Miss Cackle," said Mildred. "It's Agatha. Don't forget she looks exactly like Miss Cackle. She's got a jam jar, so I'll bet she's going to snail eyes her. But I can remember the snail transformation spell, and if we're fast and very brave, we can get there first and turn the tables. Come on, I'll fling the door open. You both jump on her, and I'll do the snail spell. Let's go for it." Chapter 17. They flung the door open and saw Agatha poised with arm outstretched towards the sleeping Miss Cackle. Enid and Maud sprang across the room and hurled themselves onto her. They all went down in a mass of arms and legs, like a rugby scrum, as Mildred tried to get a clear zap at Agatha while chanting the snail spell. Miss Cackle was now sitting up in bed, a look of complete astonishment on her face, as this amazing scene took place in front of her. "What on earth are you girls doing?" she exclaimed, sounding furious. "Can't explain yet, Miss Cackle," said Mildred, delighted to find that only Enid and Maud were now on the floor, and that a rather large snail was making for the open door. Mildred picked up the snail Agatha and dropped her on the bed of leaves in the jam jar, and she handed the jar to Miss Cackle. "Look, Miss Cackle," she explained, "it's Agatha. She's been here all the time, disguised as Miss Granite. She was just about to snail eyes you. See, your name is on the jar. Her coven of witches is arriving in—" She glanced at Miss Cackle's wall clock. "Exactly 15 minutes at the backyard gate. We've got to head them off." "Good gracious me!" exclaimed Miss Cackle. "You mean my sister, Agatha, has been right here under my very nose all this time, masquerading as Miss Granite? She must have been laughing up her sleeve at all of us. Why, I even hired her against Miss Harbroom's advice. I'll never hear the last of that. Come along, girls. Let's go down to the back gate and work out a plan. We can leave my sister here safely in the jar intended for me." "What are we going to do, Miss Cackle?" asked Maud nervously, as they arrived at the back gate at 1:50, with 10 minutes to spare. At that very moment, the handle began to turn, and the gate creaked open. "Jump on them!" yelled Mildred. The three friends hurled themselves at the person coming through the gate and flung her to the ground. A beautiful black cat leapt yowling out of the way, and a broomstick carried by the person snapped in half as they all collapsed onto the floor. "What is the meaning of this?" thundered a terrifying voice they knew so well. "Have you all lost your senses?" It was Miss Harbroom, home late from an unexpectedly difficult game of chess with Miss Pentangle, and to make matters worse, Miss Pentangle had won. Mildred and Enid sheepishly helped Miss Harbroom to her feet, while Maud retrieved Miss Harbroom's hat, which was squashed almost completely flat, where everyone had fallen on it. Miss Harbroom was so angry that she was emitting tiny sparks and puffs of purple smoke from her ears. She looked as if she might actually explode. The girls gazed across imploringly at Miss Cackle, who came to their rescue. "Thank goodness it's you, Miss Harbroom," she said, dusting her down. "Let me quickly explain to you that in 5 minutes' time we are yet again expecting an invasion of the school by a coven of evil witches, masterminded by my appalling sister Agatha. You were quite right about Miss Granite's teaching qualities, Miss Harbroom. In fact, she is not a teacher at all. She is my evil twin sister in disguise. Fortunately, Mildred here discovered the plot to turn us all into snails. Mildred has already caught and snail-eyed Agatha, who is upstairs, imprisoned in one of her own glass jars. The rest are arriving in precisely," she looked at her watch, 3 minutes from now, expecting to be met by Agatha. I really can't quite think how to deal with this in such a short space of time." Miss Harbroom took all this in her stride immediately, as if it was quite normal to be greeted by such an astonishing story at 2 o'clock in the morning. "It's obvious what to do, Miss Cackle," she said, taking the helm at once. "The rest of Agatha's witches will be expecting Agatha to let them in. As you look exactly like your sister, just let them in. In a confident way. Tell them to wait outside and you will let them in one by one. Mildred can turn them into snails as they come in. Do you think you're up to a mass snail-in, Mildred?" "It's my best spell, Miss Harbroom," said Mildred. "I can do ants now, too," she added proudly. "What have ants got to do with it?" snapped Miss Harbroom. "Just concentrate on snails, Mildred. We don't want to find an ant's nest under the floorboards." The hall clock struck 2, and a light tap was heard on the back door. The girls' hearts were thumping as they stood in the shadows and watched Miss Cackle open the door. "One at a time, ladies," she whispered into the yard as she ushered the first witch inside. Chapter 18. By 3 o'clock, Miss Harbroom, Miss Cackle, and their 3 exhausted pupils were all up in Miss Cackle's room, contemplating several shoeboxes full of the entire coven, except for one jam jar which contained Agatha, now sulking under the leaves. Mildred had rescued Tabby from his cat basket prison in the imposter's room and was holding him very gently. "Let's all have a nice cup of tea," said Miss Cackle. "I really think we deserve one after such a ghastly night. Especially Mildred here. I know that she does have her moments of unruliness, Miss Hardbroom, but she also does have quite an extraordinary knack of being in the right place at the right time, especially when it comes to my sister. No wonder Agatha locked her in the airing cupboard as fast as possible." Miss Hardbroom took Mildred's arm and pulled her towards the wall lantern. "What are all these little black specks on your face?" she said, peering at Mildred, who shrank back nervously. "You look as if someone sprayed ink all over you." "I think it was from when I was an ant, Miss Hardbroom," said Mildred. "An ant," said Miss Hardbroom. "What is all this about ants, Mildred?" "Never mind," soothed Miss Cackle. "It's a long story and we're all tired out. We'll have to find a new teacher for Form 3 first thing tomorrow. Actually, I've just received a late application from a Miss Mould, who sounds promising. She teaches art and ceramics, as well as basic potions and advanced flying. What do you think, Miss Hardbroom?" "I think she sounds impossible, Miss Cackle," agreed Miss Hardbroom. "But I think she might be best for my Year 2s. They're a quiet bunch this year, and I can see that Form 3 would benefit from some firm guidance after such a dreadful start to the term." "An excellent idea, Miss Hardbroom," Miss Cackle beamed. "I'm sure the girls would be most relieved to be back in your care for a 3rd year. Wouldn't you, girls?" The girls looked stunned and didn't know what to say. "That's settled then," said Miss Cackle. "Off to bed now, girls. And thank you for all your hard work." The 3 friends trooped downstairs together. "I have to hand it to you, Millie," said Maud with a smile. "Things are never boring when you're around. I don't know why HB calls you the worst witch. I think she ought to create a special award just for you." "You're unique," laughed Enid. "The one and only, never to be repeated Mildred Hubble. Always gets out of trouble, whatever it is." "I know it sounds a bit weird," said Mildred, draping Tabby over her shoulder and smoothing the fur between his ears. "But I think it might actually be quite comforting to have Miss Hardbroom bossing us all around again. More normal, if you know what I mean." Maud agreed heartily. "I know just what you mean, Mill," she said. "I have to admit that I was almost pining for some law and order over the last few days." Miss Hardbroom materialised with a whoosh at the entrance to the Form 3 bedrooms. "And I've missed you too," she said, with an almost friendly smile. "You may be hard work, Form 3, but you certainly come up with some very interesting results." This brief flicker of friendliness was gone in a second. "Now then, into your rooms, lights out and asleep in 2 minutes, she barked, "and no more talking." Mildred dived under the covers and settled Tabby in his usual position on her chest. To her delight, he started to purr and butt her hand so that she could go on smoothing his head, just the way he liked, and before long the 2 of them were so fast asleep that they didn't even hear the bats come in from their night's hunting. And that is the end of The Worst Witch Saves the Day by Jill Murphy. Hope you enjoyed that one, guys. I'll be back soon with lots more stories and videos coming your way very soon on my channel. If you'd like to subscribe or hit a like, that's always appreciated. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.